not inviting me, but yeah, thank you for inviting me for this conference. It's I work at the University of Sarajevo. My main interest is actually legal theory and theory of the state. But actually, I've dealt quite a lot with the Bosnian case, specifically with federalism, consensus-based democracy, and some elements of non-territorial autonomy. Probably some people from the region are quite familiar with the Bosnian case. It's quite interesting from the perspective of research, not so much when you live in this context. So actually, in my paper, I pose some questions. I'm going to answer only 2 of them. The rest 2 you can read in my paper. So my first question is, what are the elements of federalism and consensus-based democracy and non-territorial autonomy in our constitutional system? Second question actually is, how has the Bosnian Herzegovina constitutional system actually moved for something which is territorial autonomy to something which is non-territorial autonomy? And when I say this, I particularly mean legally, in a normative way, and not in a social context. And actually, what is the role of the Constitutional Court and the European Court of Human Rights in actually reshaping our constitutional system? Just to be easy to follow, this is Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm going to actually later explain these parts and actually what does this mean. First, the question is, and actually why is it important to answer this question, so what are the elements of federalism, consensus-based democracy? Because in our political system, it was, we still have actually debates of what is the nature of our political system. And to answer this question is very important in the sense, do we actually have the system which represents collectives, or is the system which actually represents individuals? And actually, this is very important to answer, not only from the perspective of legal theory or theory of the state or practice, but also is very important to answer this question for the political elites, because they actually move differently from the position. If they say it's highly decentralized state, so actually they position themselves as individualists. Or if they say it's a decentralized, it's a federal state or confederal state, they position themselves more as the representatives of collective. In theory or in comparative literature, there have been different debates on what are the characteristics of our system. But actually, after 25 years after the war, we can say we have developed some consensus on our system. First, Bosnia and Herzegovina has demonstrated elements of federal system. And actually, something which is more cooperative federal system and within the pluralistic society. So actually, we have federal system not because of the territory, but actually the idea to have federal system is to protect collectives. Second part of federal system, which is more within the federal theory, is actually that we have hierarchy relationship between the state level and federal units level. There are divisions of competences. Federal units are quasi-state because they have their own constitutional system, human rights, or actually judiciary system, etc. Federal units have the right to self-organize, and they are represented in the federal authorities. And they, of course, they don't have right to succeed. This is the part when it comes to the federalism. The second part is actually the consensus-based democracy. I can never pronounce this constitutional. That's why I use this consensus-based democracy, because for me it's hard to pronunciate. So first is element of federalism, and second element of the consensus-based democracy. So how do we see these elements within our constitutional system? So the groups are represented, so actually 3 groups actually, they're building blocks of the state. They make a composition of institutions, whether quota-based, depending on the level, or proportional in terms of representation of social groups. And second part is actually decision-making processes. either they have the right to blockade or they have the right to make some kind of political pressure not to have some decision adopted. So to put it easily, when it comes to our constitutional system, we have three major ethnic groups, and then we call them constituent people. So they are the building blocks of the state. And then the second level is national minorities, which we have 17 plus people, or actually citizens who don't define themselves through ethnic categories. So you can see that in our constitutional system, so it's a predominance of the collective over the citizens. This map actually shows the federal units. So the red federal unit is Republika Srpska, mainly inhabited by the ethnic Serbs. This bluish, I don't know, like this other one. It's a federation of BNH. It actually composes 10 cantons, so it's a federation within the federation. It's mainly inhabited by the Bosniaks, Muslims, and the Croats in Bosnia. And then there's this yellow spot. So it's actually another federal unit. So it's semi-municipal and a semi-federal unit. It's Brčko district, which has the special status. What was the problem actually? So we never had this change of our constitution, but we had some kind of factual changes within our constitutional system. So then I come to this second question. The second question is how our constitutional system has evolved, affected by the Constitutional Court and hopefully European Court for Human Rights. So there was this very important constitutional decision from the 2000, and this constitutional decision actually, so before 2000, constituent people, Serbs, Bosniaks, and Croats were actually considered to have autonomy within some parts of the Bosnian territory. So before 2000, Serbs were constituent people only in the part of Republika Srpska, so this is this red, and the Croats and Bosnians were only constituent people in this other part, bluish, this pinkish color. So we can say that before the constitutional court decision, we had something. Constituent people had actually territorial autonomy within our consensus-based democracy. In 2000, Constitutional Court has declared some provisions of the entity's constitution, so the federal unit's constitution, that are anti-constitutional, meaning that we actually, in general, we have shifted from territorial autonomy to something which is non-territorial autonomy, legally speaking. I'm just gonna. So, what was before? What was the after 2000? So there was the identity of ethnicity and territory. So ethnicity was actually attached to something which is territory. I was always talking about like Serbs in Republika Srpska, Croats and Bosnians within the territory of federation. After, so principle of constituency has shifted from territorial to non-territorial, saying the three ethnic groups are now constituent people in the whole territory of Bosnia. So, meaning when it comes to the federal units, which are two, Federation of Bosnia, Serbs had an identified status or the status of national minority. After the decision, Serbs are one of the constituent people. Why is this important to shift this position is because, of course, of the sharing power. So then you also have the right to block decisions, you have the right to be represented, you have the right to voter representation, etc. Also, there has been some changes in Republika Srpska. So Croats and Bosniaks either had identified status or the status of national minority, and actually shifted to the this position that Croats and Bosnians are constituents people. So actually we shifted for something which is territorial autonomy to something which is non-territorial autonomy thanks to the decision of the Constitutional Court. Second part is actually, the third part is actually what do we do with so-called the others. Why we say the others? Because our Constitution says we have the three groups and then the others. We don't know usually what the other means, but with the interpretation of our Constitutional Court, he said others are 17 actually national minorities and people who are citizens but actually don't want to declare themselves through the ethnic categories. The importance of this decision actually that national minorities and the citizens who actually don't want to identify themselves had the right of some kind of representation with, at the level of federal units, usually in the House of Peoples. So actually they reshaped the House of Peoples, so the national minorities had the right to be represented. Usually in our constitutional system is actually that the national minorities have the right to be represented at the local level, so the level of the municipalities, not at the level of federal units. So actually this decision actually reshaped the position of national minorities, but also the position of constituents people of within our constitutional system. So actually what is actually important within this decision, Constitutional Court developed three constitutional principles. One principle is the principle of multi-ethnicity, which means that the overall state structure of Bosnia and Herzegovina corresponds to a model of multi-ethnic statehood, where territorial delimitation does not have to lead to institutional segregation and national homogenization within the state institution. Second principle is the principle of collective equality of constituents people, meaning that they have to be equal, collectively equal at the level of federal units, and of course this idea of prohibition of discrimination. So we had the changes at the level of federal units, and still there are political debates on the idea how to implement other decisions which are actually European Court of Human Rights. We have a decision of, so the problem is that we still don't have the national minorities' right to be represented or have the right to be elected at the level of the federation, so at actually the level of the state. We have couple of decisions, I'm not going to enumerate them, and actually my main conclusion is actually how the judicial activism actually can change and actually influence the system to evolve from something which is territorial to non-territorial, something to to actually see the rights of national minorities to be represented within the federal units, and the next step within a couple of decisions, say the Infinity decision before the European Court, Ilias, Pilas, Azra Zorni's decision before the Constitutional Court. Actually, the next step is to shift to the right to be represented national minorities at the state level. How is it going to? I mean, how the steps are going to take, or how we're going to develop this is. Probably this is going to be decided this year or the next year, because the next year are general elections, so it's very important also to change the electoral law in sense to see how we're going to represent the national minorities within our constitutional system, specifically at the state level, but also the people who don't, citizens who don't identify themselves ethnically. So thank you very much. I think I'm in
Thank you very much, Damir. And indeed, it was very interesting to hear that even if you think about Bosnia-Herzegovina as a very rigid constitutional setting, established also by the international treaties of the Dayton Agreement and so on, there are still rooms for reflecting the changing social dynamics. So I think it's very much interesting for all of us. Any questions? I think we can take one or two questions maximum. Yes, Ljubica, please.
Thank you, Damir. Very interesting. I also observed something in comparative perspective, so just side remark for me, it was interesting that this constitutional court decision needed then later the decisions of I chair, so it wasn't the constitutional assemblies themselves, but
No.
international pressure. So this is a side remark how this was implemented later. But my question, which I wanted to ask yesterday, also the colleague on Cyprus, and if I may say, you can disagree whether Bosnia and Herzegovina is a divided society. So if it is divided, how we can, or how is it possible to get out this deadlock? And is it then better to go more territorial autonomy paths or non-territorial, or how to strike this balance to get out of this deadlock if it's possible? Or the national paradigm is or national state paradigm is so rigid and so present that in the end not only in Bosnia but in divided society actually we are weak with this NTA and we just go into this independence.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just add a sentence to Ljubica?
Yes.
Is it more divided? We hear all the time that Bosnia is a dysfunctional and failed state. Is it more divided constitutionally, and if you want politically, than Belgium?
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Less functional than Belgium.
Yeah, that's a hard question. I'm gonna.
Yeah. Just putting the another.
I didn't want. I know that there in 2000 there was this very strong position of the Office of High Representative. I just didn't want to, for the people, because it's very difficult to follow all the changes within the Bosnian constitutional system. But I wrote it in paper, so actually it was the Office of High Representative who actually imposed these changes at the entities level. But there were some, I would say. Consensus among the political party that this is going to be adopted, so to say. So, but he was actually who enforced it. Is it more divided? I think it's not. We have this similar level of dysfunctionality when it comes to Belgium. We had also the. For example, Belgium didn't have a state government for more than 1 year. We had this kind of situations, but like we didn't have the state government more than 1 year. But actually, we don't have this term technical mandate. So the old government was functioning in a sense. If you have the parliament who can actually adopt your decision, and we never function as a majority minority because 70% of all parties in the councils of ministers are actually also in the parliament. So actually, you don't have the real oppositions within the state parliament. But the real life in Bosnia is actually under the state level, so entities level, canton level. So cantons within the federation are actually semi-states. And then the real life is actually under the state level. So the state level is not so, I mean, it's important for some foreign politics, for coordinations or something, but actually the real life is undergone under the federal, under the state level. So the federal units level, so healthcare, education, economy is actually within the state level. I would say it's is it divided? I mean, if you have a consensus-based democracy, then of course it's divided, because this is the assumption that it's a divided society, and then these are the mechanisms actually how can you overcome these divisions. But I would say that in the last 10 years, political elites are actually the ones who perpetuate these divisions in order to stay on power more than the actually citizens. For example, you have I don't know, like 30% citizens from the East Sarajevo, they work in Sarajevo, there's constant communication. So among the citizens and the people, it's not, you can't see actually these divisions, but political elites are the ones who actually perpetuate these divisions. What are the next steps? I mean, we are now at the level of, I mean, at the point where something has to be changed. So that's why we have this constant ups and downs in the sense of like stagnation, progress, stagnation, constantly something going back. Because I think we are at the point that we need to deal with some issues. And there is still this issue, I talk about this at the end of the paper, that we have some problems within the consensus-based democracy which need to be solved. This illegitimate presentation of Croats in the presidency. Dealing with these issues actually is going to pluralize, for example, the Croat political body, which is also very important. And when you solve these problems, then we can actually move towards the other issues, which are, for example, presentation of national minorities, etc. I think this, I mean, state level is more or less dysfunctional because there is the way how you can blockade the decision, but the lower level where actually the real life's happening is really not is not in a blockade, so to say. I don't know if I have answered your question because it's not so easy to. But yeah, I will say that. Yeah, it is divided, but not divided as political elites would like to represent, so to say. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And we have another question from Pete. Yes, please go ahead. We can hear you. Thank you.
So if I had answered, are there a cooperation among the political parties? Was that the question? If I had understood it correctly. Yeah, if I had. So you can see this very good polarization among the Serb political parties, which is also important. So you have this one who are more pragmatic, who are more towards the economy, healthcare, etc., and the second one who is more into populism. Actually, Milorad Dodik, he was our member of president. He was day before in Budapest, talking very populistically about the LGBT community, about the situation in Bosnia, against the European Union, against the Western Europe. So this is and this polarization among the Serbian political parties is actually very good because you can find among the Bosniaks there are political parties, so-called the third, we call them it's actually a coalition of three parties, and they already had some kind of meetings to form a common platform for the Bosnian Herzegovina. These are good steps, for example, because you have some polarization within the Bosniaks, and there's also polarization among the Serbs, which actually have different politics contrasting with the nationalistic politics. So it's not national politics, it's actually very nationalistic, very populistic, it actually doesn't offer anything except raising the political heat in the country. It's very non-productive. And I can see, and among the Croats, they always switch depending on the main political party. HDZ actually always switch depending on the political situation. So I think that for the next general elections are very important, and you can see very strict polarization within the Serbian political party, but also within the Bosniak, who are actually won quite a lot of position in the last local elections, and also running some cantons in the federation, which is actually quite good. So you have these alternatives which are cross-entity border in sense, so trying to reach something which is common platform. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we need to move on. So thank you, Damir.
Thank you.